This video has been edited to shorten watch time by removing sidebars, evidence handling, and long pauses. Witness testimony remains intact, with minor cuts to hesitation words and stutters.
We have not had the pleasure of meeting, so good morning, Dr. Scordi-Bello.
Morning.
With regard to cause of death as opposed to manner of death, is it correct that a forensic pathologist is tasked with determining that cause of death that includes contributing factors, injuries, and circumstances regarding the medical legal death investigation? Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And I'm using the term medical legal. Is that a term that you're familiar with?
Yes.
And is it correct that medical legal means, particularly for medical examiners, that there's a medical aspect to the investigation that you perform, and there's also a legal aspect or a law enforcement aspect to it? Is that correct?
Correct.
And that's a little different than what physicians usually do, right? Because isn't it the ordinary course that it's mostly just medical, but medical examiners by statute and law need to have both of those prongs taken into consideration? Do I have that right?
Yes.
So in other words, the forensic pathologist, which you've indicated you are, is tasked with determining the cause of death, which answers the question as to why, in more layman's terms, why did the individual's body stop functioning at a particular time, correct?
Yes.
So more broadly, the cause of death is generally defined as the disease or the injury that resulted in the death of a person.
Correct.
So let's now, if we could please, move to the manner of death. And I'd like to summarize, I know you covered it on direct, but I want to put it in a slightly different context, and hopefully I'll get it right. So medical examiners, as you've stated, are also tasked with, if they can, determining the manner of death or the circumstances under which the death occurred, correct?
Correct.
So manner can and does involve the circumstances under which the death occurred.
Yes.
And that causes one to go the medical examiner to go beyond just medical analysis. You take into consideration other factors which we'll get to. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you talked about, and I'm just going to go through them quickly, but if you could just check me on this, the 5 main categories of manner of death. So you talked about natural causes, correct?
Yes.
You talked about accident.
Correct.
You talked about suicide. You talked about homicide. And then the last category, undetermined. Do I have that correct?
Yes, you do.
So what I'd like to do is to focus on the undetermined category. And my understanding is, doctor, that that's where you landed, that's where you concluded with regard to manner of death of Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
Correct.
So undetermined is a term that is used and that you use. And does that mean that when the information pointing to one manner is not more compelling than other reasonable possibilities, or the death investigation lacks sufficient information to opine on a manner of death, at the time of death, the certificate is signed? Is that generally correct?
Yes.
So, as we've talked about, I'm just trying to follow or just develop some logic and see if this is in agreement with you, that as a medical examiner, you're specifically tasked with conducting that medical legal investigation. And what we've just talked about is a bit of the method of analysis that you go through for that, correct?
I conduct the autopsy and I request information information from the investigative body that is out there investigating the other aspect of the case, not the body itself.
Yes. So is it correct that there's 4 general components to a forensic pathologist's death investigation? Is scene investigation one of the components?
It depends on the jurisdiction where you practice. Scene investigation is part of forensic pathology in certain jurisdictions, and it is the responsibility of the district attorney and law enforcement in other jurisdictions. In the state of Massachusetts, we are responsible for the autopsy, and the DA's office and law enforcement are responsible for the scene investigation.
Excellent. So scene investigation in the state of Massachusetts is not within your domain in the office of the medical examiner. That is the domain of the district attorney and law enforcement, correct?
Correct.
How about another aspect, forensic autopsy and laboratory testing? That's within your domain, correct?
Correct.
And how about police reports and witness statements?
That is not under my jurisdiction. That is under the district attorney's office and the police.
Do you consider information, nonetheless, from police reports and witness statements in your analysis?
Yes.
And do you also consider, even though it's not within your jurisdiction in Massachusetts, do you also consider information about scene investigation?
Yes.
So it's correct then that you consider, whether it's within your jurisdiction or not, you consider scene investigation and police reports and medical statements, correct?
Yes.
And then forensic autopsy and laboratory testing is right within your jurisdiction, and therefore, of course, you consider that. And then lastly, medical history and hospital records, is it therefore, am I correct that that's something within your jurisdiction and that you consider in performing your forensic pathologist death investigation?
Yes.
So now let's move on to the application of those principles. So in order to conduct a proper medical legal investigation, the medical examiner has to have certain qualities, if you will. Is one of them being well-grounded in general medical knowledge?
Yes.
Is another appropriate training and experience in forensic pathology?
Yes.
In other words, you wouldn't want a specialist, for example, in cardiology without anything more to be conducting a death investigation. Is that correct?
I would not want them to be conducting an autopsy, correct?
Right. Would you want a neurologist to conduct a death investigation?
Personally, or are you asking me that? No, I don't think every physician has their specialty and their training, and forensic pathologists are trained to perform autopsies, and cardiac surgeons are trained to perform cardiac surgery.
Would you want a neurosurgeon to be conducting a death investigation?
To be performing an autopsy? No.
So you wouldn't want a neurosurgeon to perform an autopsy?
No.
Because you don't believe they're qualified to do so, correct?
I don't believe they've had the appropriate training to perform an autopsy.
Going back into the many qualities of a medical examiner and attributes, they also have to have the ability to form opinions based upon all the available information using the scientific method along with sound reasoning. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And you're familiar with the term scientific method?
Yes.
And is it fair to say that the scientific method generally is sort of a systematic pursuit of knowledge that involves recognition and definition of a problem? Is that fair?
Yes.
Is it also involve the collection of data through observation and experimentation where appropriate?
Correct.
Does the scientific method also include the analysis of data?
Yes.
Does the scientific method also include the formulation, evaluation, and testing of hypotheses?
Yes.
And does it also, where possible, include the selection of a final hypothesis after considering other hypotheses?
Correct.
So what we've just discussed is a fair explication, a fair explanation of the scientific method.
Correct.
And the scientific method is part of the autopsy and forensic pathology analysis, correct?
Correct.
Now, applying one concept, that medical legal concept we talked about, just holding for a moment, if you could, the medical and going to the legal, if you will, law enforcement that you said in Massachusetts is not under your jurisdiction, but nonetheless, you consider information arising from it.
Yes.
Are you familiar with a person named Michael Proctor? Is that name familiar to you?
Yes, it is.
And at one time, Michael Proctor was a trooper, correct?
Correct.
And so did former Trooper Proctor inform you of the working law enforcement theory at the time of the investigation of this matter, namely his working theory, a collision of a motor vehicle with a pedestrian? Did he inform you of that?
He informed our office of that, yes.
He informed your office. And is it fair to say that he informed your office or provided that information to your office in or about February of 2022?
Part of that information was provided to our office at the time of the autopsy. One of the pieces of information that had come in, and there were multiple sources calling into our office providing information, was that this was a possible person struck by a motor vehicle.
And the time of the autopsy, if I have it correctly, was that around the end of January of 2022?
The autopsy was January 31st.
Dr. Scordi-Bello, if I could hand that to you, please. You could take a look at it, and when you've had a fair opportunity to look at it, you can just look back up and I'll proceed at that time.
Yes, I recognize the picture. Well, I've never seen this picture before, but I know what it's depicting.
Thank you. What is depicted in that picture?
It's a picture of two individuals standing in a morgue setting, which looks very similar to our morgue at the Cape Cod office.
Very good. Dr. Scordi-Bello, do you recognize any of the individuals in that picture?
To be perfectly honest, no, I don't.
With regard to the person on the right, do you recognize that person?
No, I don't.
And you said you recognize the setting, correct?
Yes.
And you, if I heard you correctly, you said this is the Cape Cod facility?
It appears to be, correct.
Right. So you testified earlier, if I recall correctly, that the autopsy was performed at the Cape Cod facility of the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner.
Yes, it was.
And you're normally in, as I recall, the Westfield, in an office that covers Western Massachusetts. It's Westfield.
Correct.
But you were at the Cape Cod facility, as I understand it, because there was a staff shortage and you had to travel down to Cape Cod for this. Is this correct?
Correct.
So you weren't at your normal home base sort of facility. This is a facility that you went to for this autopsy, correct?
For this autopsy and multiple others, yes.
Yes. And you were covering a staff shortage, and that was the reason you went to Cape Cod, correct?
Correct.
And what's depicted in this picture are two individuals. For two individuals to be present, is there a protocol that they had to follow to be present for that? Like a sign-in or an authorization?
Yes, there is a sign-in sheet that individuals have to put their name and their shield number and before they can come into the autopsy room.
So they have to put a shield number down, correct? You mentioned a shield number.
Yes.
And does that therefore mean that even though you don't know who they are, that they are with law enforcement? Are you able to determine that?
Correct. I believe they were with law enforcement.
So those two individuals were with law enforcement, but you don't know who they are.
I don't know who they are specifically and what their actual position was.
But they were with law enforcement.
I believe, if my memory serves me right, there was a person from crime scene investigation and someone from state police. But I'm working on a 2+ year memory.
Fair. That's fair. That's fair. I'm not going to ask you more questions to probe the memory. We can take that down. And we are finished with that. If you could hand that to the, thank you. Now, we were speaking about former Trooper Proctor. Do you recall former Trooper Proctor sending you a copy of scene photographs and wanting to schedule a phone call with you so that he could explain the status of his investigation? You recall that?
Yes.
And that occurred approximately in March of 2022?
Yes, approximately.
Right. And the method of communication of that was that by email, to the best of your recollection?
I requested that our medical legal investigator, we have our own investigators at the office that are responsible for obtaining medical records and sometimes being the liaison between us and law enforcement to get reports. I requested that she contact whoever was in charge of the investigation and set up a meeting, a phone call. So since it had already been a few weeks since the autopsy, I wanted to make sure that if there was any additional information that could be provided to me, I could take it into account because I had 90 days to issue a report and a death certificate on this case.
Now, you've mentioned the 90 days on direct. You just mentioned it now. Is the 90 days a hard and fast rule, or is it just something you aspire to as a matter of good practices?
It's not a hard and fast rule. It's something that as an office we try to achieve. Again, the reason being that there are family members, next of kin that are waiting for these reports and these death certificates for various reasons. So is it possible to go over the 90 days? Absolutely, if necessary. But we do try to finish our part in those 90 days.
So it's possible to go past the 90 days, but there would, given the considerations you just articulated, there'd have to be a pretty good reason why you'd want to do that, right?
Correct.
And in this situation, you concluded that you had sufficient information on the medical side and the legal side to come to the conclusions that you needed to come to. Is that fair?
Well, I had sufficient information on the medical side because I did the autopsy and I had those findings. I did not have sufficient information that pointed to one manner of death over another manner of death. And therefore, I stated that the manner of death was undetermined.
Exactly. So the manner of death is undetermined, and I want to, if I could, with you pursue that a little bit. When you came toward the end of that 90-day period, you had information from the law enforcement side on their theory of what had happened, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
I'll let that one stand.
You had performed all of the medical investigation and analysis that you needed to perform, is that correct?
Yes.
There wasn't something more that you wanted to do on the medical side. You had mentioned, to be fair, you had Dr. Stonebridge involved as well. You had what you needed on that side, correct?
Yes.
And you therefore concluded on the manner of death that there was a not more compelling or more likely than other reasonable possibilities. Is that fair?
Yes.
So in furtherance of that, on April 14th of 2022, you issued a death certificate, correct?
Yes.
And please feel free to check your report of any dates or any other particular as I go through.
Okay. I issued my final report on April 14th, correct, and I would assume that the death certificate was on or around that same day.
Thank you. Now, to back up a little bit with regard to the autopsy, as you stated, it was conducted, I just want to do a little bit of a timeline, on January 31st of 2022, correct?
Yes.
And we discussed that the body of Mr. O'Keefe was presented to the Cape Cod location, correct?
Yes.
And you also discussed that you brought Dr. Stonebridge to work with you on this matter, correct?
She didn't physically come to the office. The way Dr. Stonebridge was involved is at the time of autopsy when the brain was removed, having seen that there were injuries, I saved the brain in a special solution, and then the brain was transported to our facility in Boston. That's where Dr. Stonebridge examines the specimens. And after examining the brain, she issued a report.
Who asked Dr. Stonebridge to become involved in the matter?
I did.
And Dr. Stonebridge is triple board certified, correct?
Correct.
She's a forensic pathologist, correct?
Yes.
That means she's achieved board certification in forensic pathology like you?
Do you know that?
I do.
I'll allow them.
Yes, she's board certified in forensic pathology.
And she is board certified in general pathology, correct?
Yes.
And she's board certified in neuropathology, correct?
Correct.
Can you briefly describe to the jury what neuropathology is?
Neuropathology is a subset or specific additional training in forensic pathology where the person spends a considerable amount of time, usually 1 to 2 years, examining brains and learning all about the diseases of the brain as well as trauma to the brain.
Now, you asked her to be involved, as you indicated earlier, correct?
Yes.
And you determined that she should be involved because there was a brain injury, correct?
There was trauma to the brain, correct?
Trauma to the brain. Is it a fair characterization that Dr. Stonebridge is sort of the brains of the brain area of autopsy? Is that fair?
I'm going to sustain the objection. Let's move on.
With regard to Dr. Stonebridge, would you agree that she's really uniquely qualified in some ways? Or how would you describe her qualifications, Dr. Stonebridge?
Sustained.
With regard to Dr. Stonebridge, what did she do?
I'm going to see you at sidebar on this, please.
Sidebar.
Dr. Scordi-Bello, are you aware of an attorney named, or excuse me, a doctor named Zeke Wolf?
No, I'm not.
Now I'd like to move on to another category. Based on the information that was presented to you as part of your examination and analysis, is it correct that you presume that because Mr. O'Keefe's body was found in the snow and his body temperature was 80 degrees, that he died from hypothermia as one of the causes?
I reached that conclusion after performing the autopsy and after seeing some findings that were consistent with hypothermia and then combined with the information that was provided to me about Mr. O'Keefe's body being found in the snow, I came to the conclusion that was one of the things that contributed.
Did you consider whether there may have been other reasons as to why his body reached that temperature of 80 degrees? Sort of applying the scientific method and seeing if there were other reasons?
Other than being out in the snow? No, I do not.
Do you know whether there are other alternative reasons how his body could reach the temperature of 80 degrees?
People can become hypothermic for other reasons, such as sepsis. But in this particular case, I didn't have any reason to believe that that was part of the circumstances.
You're familiar with the medical phrase differential diagnosis, correct?
Yes.
And a differential diagnosis is a term that's used by doctors to pursue other potential causes of a medical injury. Is that a fair general statement?
Yes.
So, for example, if somebody is having difficulty breathing, a doctor may say, I think it's the heart is their primary hypothesis, but they may want to differentially diagnose this and look at the lungs. Is that an example of a differential diagnosis let's look at the lungs to see if that may be the problem? Is that a good, fair example?
In the example you're giving, yes.
So applying that concept, and do you believe the concept of, applying that concept to this situation, did you perform a differential diagnosis as to the cause of the death and question whether there was hypothermia as any cause of the death of the decedent? Did you make that analysis?
I looked at the anatomic findings that I had at the time of autopsy, the information that was provided to me based on the circumstances and where the body was found. And I came to the conclusion that there were hypothermic changes in Mr. O'Keefe's body.
So you just used the phrase hypothermic changes. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Can there be hypothermic changes without a cause of death being hypothermia?
Yes, of course.
So you can have signs in the body of hypothermia, but you can also conclude that a cause of death is not from hypothermia, correct?
If the person is deceased and I am examining the body and there are multiple things that I believe contribute to the death, then I tend to include all of them. Meaning that if this was a drug intoxication and the body also showed signs of hypothermia, I would include both of them on the death certificate, because there is no scientific way of teasing out whether it was just one or the other or both. In this particular case, I had two processes that were going on. One was the head trauma, and the other one were these hypothermic changes. I put all that together and again included or took into account the investigative information of where the body was found, what the temperature was when the body was found, whether the person was still alive or not. And I came to the conclusion that the cause of death was blunt impact injuries of head. And I included the hypothermia because I saw during the autopsy that there were changes consistent with hypothermia.
So I want to break that down a little bit, if I could, with you. So you testified on direct, and I think you alluded to it here, that the primary cause, that used that phraseology on direct, was blunt force injury. Is that correct?
Blunt impact injuries to the head, yes.
Blunt impact injuries to the head. And that's the primary cause, right?
Correct.
And then there's, and I'm not clear on what you refer to on direct as a secondary cause of death of hypothermia, but you've used a little different phrase in some of your answers, and I want to make sure I got it right. Hypothermic considerations. Can you repeat what it was?
I said hypothermic changes.
Hypothermic changes, and we agree that you can have hypothermic changes without a conclusion of hypothermia, correct?
No, hypothermic changes are what I'm referring to are actual things that I can see in the organs that are consistent with hypothermia. They're anatomic findings. They're things I can see with my eyes.
So you can, I'm sorry, did you finish?
And those changes suggest and are consistent with someone being hypothermic.
As you sit here now, with regard to, you used the phraseology consistent with hypothermia, signs of hypothermia, that's what I want to pursue just a little bit with regard to further information. We got started on this by asking whether you used the concept of differential diagnosis and hypotheses to determine the cause and manner of death. And you said in one of your answers that you relied upon law enforcement information, correct? Is that
Yes.
part of it? It was, you brought that up. You're the one who said you relied upon that, correct?
Yes.
And you've brought that up on your direct testimony and earlier in the cross. Is that correct, that you relied upon the investigation of law enforcement? So,
Sustained.
so now what I'd like to do is to ask you whether, using the concepts of differential diagnosis, scientific method, did you consider whether Mr. O'Keefe could have died somewhere other than where the body was found and been moved and placed in the snow? Did you consider that?
Objection.
Sustained.
May we approach, Your Honor?
Move along with this. We can approach in a bit.
Thank you. What if any, alternative diagnoses did you apply to Mr. O'Keefe?
I don't understand your question.
What alternative scenarios did you look at, if any, for the cause or manner of death of Mr. O'Keefe?
I'll allow that question.
At the time of the autopsy, I documented injuries and signs of hypothermia. I was provided with a set of circumstances, and at the end of the investigation, or at the end of my timeline, I concluded on the cause, but I did not conclude, or I did not determine a manner. The manner would be the circumstances you are speaking about, whether I considered other causes or circumstances. That's not how it works. I don't come up with hypothetical scenarios on how those injuries occur. I try to state the injuries, describe the injuries, state the cause of death and why that person died. And then I use all kinds of other investigative information that is provided to me to determine if I have enough to make a determination on the manner.
Did anyone provide to you any alternatives as to the finding of the body of Mr. O'Keefe in the snow?
Personally, to me, no.
Did you ask for any alternatives to the nature and location of the injury or death of Mr. O'Keefe?
I asked for all the information that was available.
Understood, but my question is, did you ask for any alternatives to the information that was provided to you as regards the location of the injuries? Did anyone provide you any alternatives to where the injuries could have occurred?
No.
Yes. So
I'm going to let the answer stand. So the answer is no, so there's no evidence of that. So next question.
So you talked about the information you had at the time. What time is that?
The information at the time was a preliminary police report and verbal communications regarding the circumstances of how Mr. O'Keefe's body was found.
And when I asked about the time, I'm not calendar time. Was this January, February, March, April of 2022?
The preliminary police report was on the day of the autopsy, and then information, I don't remember exactly how long, but in the weeks following, information was, coming in.
Do you have the ability to amend a death certificate?
Yes, I do.
And you can amend a certificate if you obtain further information with regard to the circumstances surrounding the death. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In your previous answers, you were talking about the information you had at the time. And I'm concluding that the latest that would be is April of 2022. Is that correct?
Correct.
Have you obtained or been provided with further information? In other words, information after April of 2022 regarding the cause or manner of death?
What do you mean, have I been provided? Has someone physically provided me with a report on different circumstances?
Well, what I'm just talking about is any other information that you have received or considered in terms of the analysis with regard to the cause or manner of death.
Received in what way?
Here's what I'll do. I'll be a little more specific. What I want to do is to get at the head injury of the decedent, okay? Is it fair to say that the head injury, you called it a traumatic, state what you phrased that as, because I want to use your phraseology.
Blunt impact injuries of the head.
So blunt impact injuries of the head. Is it fair to say that that was a very severe injury?
It was a severe injury, correct?
And would Mr. O'Keefe had been rendered unconscious nearly instantaneously with death following shortly thereafter?
It's very possible, yes.
Is it more than possible? Is it probable that that's what would have occurred?
I can't tell you how quickly he would have been rendered unconscious, but at some point after that injury, yes, he would have been rendered unconscious.
Is it possible he could have been rendered unconscious immediately?
So she's answered it this way. I think you need another person for that. Let's move on from that, Mr. Lessing.
You made your own determination of the cause of death, correct?
Yes, that's my job.
Understood. And what I want to do is to pursue the basis of your determination. So you used the phrase brain impact injury.
Blunt impact.
A blunt impact injury. Have I got that correct?
Blunt impact injuries of head, yes.
Of head, right. And that's your conclusion, correct?
Yes.
Based upon your conclusion, did you make any determination as to whether the decedent would be able to carry out any purposeful movement after that injury?
Define purposeful movement.
Sure. I'm talking about the ability to perhaps manipulate their hands.
I don't know.
Did you make any determination as to whether they would be able to engage in any cognitive functions, meaning processing things and making decisions?
I did not make that determination, no.
Did you observe any pattern to the injuries to the head of the decedent?
A pattern? I observed that there were injuries to the back of the head as well as other internal injuries to the base of the skull, as well as the brain.
If we could, Your Honor, publish 160 that is in evidence. But before we do, Mr. Wolf, I would like to approach Your Honor and let you know in case there's anything further
Okay.
that needs to be done. Thank you.
So why don't you come over here why don't you come over to sidebar? Sidebar.
With Your Honor's permission, I would like to publish Exhibit 160.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Scordi-Bello, if you could please draw your attention to what is depicted on both screens, pick whatever screen is most convenient for you. And what I want to do is to go over what is depicted there, and I'd like to start with just some basics. What is that white rectangle that is on the photograph?
This?
Yes.
That's a ruler.
And what's the purpose of the ruler?
To show a scale. When I measure the injury, I use the ruler to document that.
And if you could please draw your further attention to what I will refer to, and you use your own term, but just to start it, the horizontal line appears to be a laceration. You know what I'm referring to?
This, yes, this is a laceration.
Right, so it's fair to say that that's a laceration.
Correct.
And just so we get all that's depicted on this, you referred to earlier up above that, the red area. Is that an abrasion?
Yes.
And do you also denote to the left almost like a J-type item going vertically up? Yes, and going up. Do you see that?
Yeah, that I did not note that specifically. I just noted the whole injury as part of the abrasion.
That's my point. So you didn't make a separate note of what appears to be a J, and it might be easier to see it in the screen over there. It's your conclusion, but is it easier to see there?
Yeah, I can see it.
And so you didn't make a separate note as to what that was in your report, correct?
No, I did not.
Do you consider that an abrasion or something else?
I believe that's still an abrasion.
Different in any manner from the abrasion that you've noted above the laceration?
I believe it could be part of the whole abrasion, or it could be something different.
Fair enough. Would a fall backwards on a flat frozen ground produce a circular and not a linear abrasion as depicted here on the back of an injured person's head?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Assume a fall backwards on a flat frozen ground. Would such a fall and impact present that type of pattern, or would it present a circular pattern, perhaps with something like a starfish in the middle?
I'll allow that. Can you answer that?
I can say that a fall backwards could very well produce that injury.
My question is more specific, and that is a fall backwards where the person impacts the back of their head on flat, frozen ground. Would you expect that type of a laceration from that type of a fall? Not just a general fall backwards, but specifically a fall backwards where the back of the head hits flat, frozen ground. Would you expect that?
I could, yes.
And under what circumstances could a laceration like that and an abrasion, all of it together, what circumstances could cause that type from a fall backwards on flat, frozen ground?
Well, the laceration is due to the blunt impact, and so is the abrasion. The abrasion is friction. So depending on the type of surface, you mentioned flat, frozen ground, it's quite possible to have an injury as the one depicted. There's nothing inconsistent with this injury and a fall on someone's, on the back of the head with a blunt surface.
Are you familiar with the phrase pattern recognition in medicine?
Yes,
And isn't pattern recognition something that requires training with regard to being able to recognize certain patterns and determining what could be causing that pattern?
yes,
And just merely recognizing whether there is a pattern takes certain specialty training, etc.
correct.
And isn't pattern recognition a principle that you apply in the medical examiner's office?
Yeah, we do.
And so example of pattern recognition could be a knife wound, correct?
Yes,
Could be a gunshot.
correct.
And there's certain patterns that you see on a decedent that can be consistent with those types of causes of injury, correct?
Correct.
Assuming a fall backwards onto frozen ground and there being on a lawn with grass, would you expect to see any grass at all in the injury site?
It's possible to have grass.
Is it possible to have well, are you familiar with the height and weight of the decedent generally? And if you need to look at your notes, please do so.
Yes. Mr. O'Keefe was approximately 6'1" and 216 pounds.
So, assuming a fall backwards and an impact to head on, a ground with grass, a person who's 6'1", there is going to be significant acceleration forces that occur as they're going backwards. Is that correct?
That's fair to say, yes.
And therefore, the more acceleration forces, usually there's a correlation with the force of the impact.
Correct.
And in terms of force of impact and assuming grass on the ground, would you believe it's more probable than not that one would then see some grass on the head?
Sustained is definitely.
Given what you testified regarding the height of Mr. O'Keefe, and assuming what I just gave to you as a fall backwards and acceleration and forces, would you expect to see anything else on the back of his head?
You have to be more specific than that.
Right, thank you. Is it possible, if that was the manner of the fall, that there should be grass on the head? Is that possible?
Sustained.
Do you see any evidence of grass in this depiction?
No, I do not.
Did you recall ever seeing any evidence of grass when you were performing the autopsy?
I did not see evidence of grass.
Did you consider at all in performing your autopsy whether or not grass should be present given what was reported to you by law enforcement?
Sustained.
Did you make any considerations at all regarding grass in regard to your autopsy report?
I did not see any grass. No, I did not make any determinations.
And was grass at all even a consideration in your analysis?
I had very limited information as to the exact nature of the surface at the time of autopsy.
So the answer is no to that
No.
question. Thank you. Did you have any information regarding the circumstances that you said you look at in trying to determine manner of death as to whether there were any stones or rocks around the scene?
That I did not have any information.
So meaning you didn't have any information, you saw no information that there were any stones or rocks by the scene, is that correct?
Sustained in that form.
What, if any, consideration did you make in your assessment of cause and manner of death with regard to stones or rocks?
I did not make any.
With regard to any other potential causes other than ground, did you consider any other possibilities that could cause the type of injuries that are depicted on the screen?
There's a number of possibilities that could cause the injury.
My question is, did you consider, not whether there are, but whether you considered them at the time you were performing the autopsy?
I'm always considering at the time of autopsy what could have caused a certain injury.
Did you put in your notes or your autopsy report any of those considerations? Are they documented?
No,
Now, in terms of differential diagnosis that we talked about, did you determine whether there were any other possible explanations for the injuries to the decedent other than what law enforcement presented to you?
I'll allow that.
internally, I consider all kinds of other explanations. I have to look at the findings and the possible ways that those injuries could have been sustained and decide whether I have enough information and whether I am satisfied with the information that I have in order to conclude or determine a manner.
Did you make any notes at all about the considerations you were just speaking about, other considerations, any notes whatsoever in any document in your autopsy report?
Not in my autopsy report, no.
Did you make any other notes of those considerations in any document that you created for this case at all?
No, these are considerations that I've had and discussions I've had with colleagues in terms of evaluating these injuries and.
And I don't want you to go into what other people said, but I want you to finish your answer.
Right, no, I did not make physical notes of my considerations.
Your Honor, I'm going into a different category, so I just wanted to alert Your Honor to it.
All right. And it will take more than 10, 15 minutes?
Oh, yes.
Okay. All right, jurors, take the lunch and recess.
Good afternoon, Dr. Scordi-Bello, and welcome back.
Thank you.
I want to move on to a slightly different aspect of the hypothermia discussion. So you've acknowledged previously that hypothermia is a very difficult diagnosis to make, correct?
Correct.
And you acknowledged that in your grand jury testimony in this proceeding, correct? Do you recall that?
I do.
And you indicated in that grand jury proceeding generally that diagnosing hypothermia is based on contextual clues. Is that correct?
On autopsy findings and investigative information, yes.
Right. And the last part, investigative, and that's that legal part, sort of the law enforcement contribution. Is that correct that you're referring to?
Correct.
You diagnosed Mr. O'Keefe with hypothermia based upon certain medical data that you believe you observed in the gastric area and the pancreatic area. Is that correct?
Correct.
And just for, I think most people will get this, just be clear, gastric is sort of synonymous with the stomach.
Stomach.
And then we know the pancreas is a separate organ. And in your autopsy, you observed for example, the lining of both the stomach and the pancreas. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, what was the word you used?
Let's start with the stomach. Did you observe the lining of the stomach as part of Mr. O'Keefe as part of the autopsy?
Yes, I observed some hemorrhages in the lining of the stomach.
We'll get to that, right? But I just want to talk about the organs and what aspects of the organs first, and then we'll get to that. And with regard to the pancreas, what aspect of the pancreas did you observe?
I examined both the external surface and the tissues around it, as well as the pancreas itself by making several cuts.
And there was also a histopathology report that was relevant to both the stomach and the pancreas, correct?
Correct.
So that histopath information informed your hypothermia analysis, is that correct?
The histopathology was done to further confirm my finding or my determination of hypothermia.
So do I have it correct, and let's start with the pancreas, that you noted the pancreas was congested and diffusely hemorrhagic? Do I have that correct? And you feel free to look at your report, please.
I will.
And I specifically, if it helps, I'm
Yes.
looking at
Page 4.
the report of autopsy. It's not numbered pages, but it would be 4. And you see liver, gallbladder, and pancreas is 1, and then you go down a couple more and you see digestive system. That's what I'm focusing on.
Okay.
And then, and the next page is the histopathology.
Yes.
All right, are we sort of oriented in the same location?
Yes.
All right, so let's start with the pancreas. So if you look at the histopathology page, it says endocrine and exocrine pancreatic tissue with vascular congestion and patchy parenchymal, that's parenchymal hemorrhage, autolytic changes. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And I want to go at these one at a time, so now I'm going to jump back to the previous page where you discussed the heading liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you see the last sentence says the pancreas is congested and diffusely hemorrhagic. You see that?
Yes.
So now what I'd like to do, and is that what you're rooting in, if you will, the analysis of hypothermia?
The determination of hypothermia was made, yes, based on these findings and the circumstances I was provided. Yes.
Right, and thank you. I'm going to get to the circumstances, but in sort of the medical legal construct that we were talking about, I want to just start first with the medical, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
So then let's now move to the organ of the stomach, a synonym gastric in terms of your report. So let's go to, please, back to the histopathology section. And under that, under pancreas is stomach. And there's a bulleted one sentence that says gastric tissue with vascular congestion and focal mucosal hemorrhage. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And then let's go back, as we did with the pancreas, for the stomach, go back to the previous page in your report under the heading digestive system. And the second sentence states the gastric mucosa shows focal areas of linear hemorrhages. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
So we've got hemorrhage discussion with the pancreas, we've got hemorrhage discussion with the stomach and the gastric area. Your diagnosis of hypothermia was not based just on gastric and pancreatic hemorrhaging alone, though, was it?
No.
And you did fairly refer to other circumstances just moments ago in your answer, correct?
Correct.
And we're going to get to that. So that means that your diagnosis of hypothermia was also informed by the information we discussed earlier that was provided to you by former Trooper Proctor in his investigation. Is that correct?
Correct.
And one aspect of that information is that Mr. O'Keefe was found in the snow, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall the death notification report in this matter?
I do recall the very initial first information that comes in. That's the death notification given to our intake staff.
Do you recall the contents of that death notification report?
Would you like me to summarize? I don't recall I don't have it in front of me, but I can tell you what the gist of it was.
Would it be helpful to you if I showed you a document that
Sure.
might refresh your recollection on what that, a document that may refresh
She
your recollection?
said sure. I don't
Thanks.
think you heard her.
I did. Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Scordi-Bello, what I'd like to do, you can read anything you want, but I'm just going to reference to the section that says circumstances of death.
Yes.
What I'd like you to do is read it to yourself, not out loud, and then when you, just that section up to here, and once you're done, if you could kindly look up and let me know.
Okay.
Dr. Scordi-Bello, did that refresh your recollection with regard to the circumstances of death section of the death notification report?
Yes.
And you could please state now what your refreshed recollection is on that topic.
Yes. The initial intake death notification was made by a physician at the hospital, and it stated that we were dealing with a adult male that was found in a snowbank. There was note of having been at a party. There was some information as to the decedent was walking to a house. There was reference to some sort of altercation or dispute with
Sustain.
Strike.
Jurors disregard that. Move on with this, Mr. Leslie. With this, but just move on.
Yeah, yes. In terms of the differential diagnosis concept that we were talking about before, based upon your refreshed recollection of circumstances of death as discussed in the death notification report, based upon that, did you consider whether Mr. O'Keefe could have been injured and died somewhere other than the front lawn of 34 Fairview?
I'm going to allow that.
initially, no.
Let's go to significance, if any, of hemorrhaging of the two organs we were talking about, the pancreas and the stomach. Is it correct that the hemorrhaging of a pancreas can be caused by many different things?
Yes, it is.
And to be clear, you found evidence of hemorrhaging of the pancreas of Mr. O'Keefe in the autopsy, correct?
Correct.
And is it correct before the grand jury, you yourself were evaluating whether the injuries had been sustained in a different environment? Well, let me ask it this way. Do you recall what your testimony was in the grand jury about hemorrhaging of the pancreas and possibilities of injuries being sustained in different environments? Do you recall any testimony on that subject?
All right, I'll see you at 10.
Sidebar.
At the grand jury, did you testify as follows? If the injuries had been sustained in a different environment where the temperature wasn't that low, then there might have been an alternative explanation for those gastric and pancreatic hemorrhages. You recall that?
Yes.
Hemorrhaging of the pancreas can also be caused by blunt force trauma, correct?
Correct.
Hemorrhaging of the pancreas can be caused by CPR, correct? cardiopulmonary resuscitation?
It's possible.
Do you know what a Lucas machine is?
Yes.
And a Lucas machine is an automated CPR machine, correct?
Correct.
And it's a rather large device, correct? It gets strapped down to the chest of someone. So instead of someone having to exercise, etc., you put on a Lucas machine that goes over the chest and it automatically does the compressions, right?
Correct.
Lucas machines can cause hemorrhaging, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, wasn't a Lucas machine applied to Mr. O'Keefe?
I believe so.
And wasn't the Lucas machine applied from when the first responders came to the scene and he was in the ambulance continually and through when he was in the hospital?
I believe so, yeah.
So when a Lucas machine is used in resuscitation efforts, you'd actually expect to see some hemorrhaging, wouldn't you?
Where?
In the stomach? In the pancreas? Would you expect to see it there?
Not in the mucosa of the stomach and not as extensive in the pancreas.
Let's talk about and pick the pancreas first. So you would agree that from the use of a Lucas machine, you would expect some degree of hemorrhaging in the pancreas, correct?
Not always.
But it's certainly possible that a Lucas machine causes hemorrhaging of the pancreas, correct?
It's possible.
And now let's move to, and there was evidence of hemorrhaging in the pancreas of Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
Correct.
Now let's move to the stomach. Isn't it possible that a Lucas machine could cause hemorrhaging in the stomach?
Personally, I have not seen it in that context.
But do you rule that out?
I can't rule it out. I can only tell you my experience.
So your personal experience is you don't believe you've seen that, but you can't rule out that a Lucas machine causes hemorrhaging to the stomach. Is that correct?
I don't believe a Lucas machine causes hemorrhage to the mucosa of the stomach.
Right. I'm not yet at the mucosa of the stomach, which is a subset of the stomach, right? You're talking about the gastric rugae.
Talking about the inner lining of the
inner
stomach.
lining, and another name for the inner lining of the stomach is the gastric rugae, R-U-G-A-E, correct?
Yes.
So I'm just talking about the stomach in general, not a subset of the stomach. Is it possible that a Lucas machine could cause hemorrhaging in the stomach?
Not in the stomach, around the stomach, in the soft tissues of the torso.
Okay. So you've said that you're aware that Mr. O'Keefe was hooked up to a Lucas machine, correct?
Yes.
And are you aware of the length of time that Mr. O'Keefe was hooked up to a Lucas machine?
No, I am not.
Do you know how many compressions per minute a Lucas machine causes?
I would have to say close to 60.
Would 100 compressions per minute be a reasonable amount of compressions for a Lucas machine to cause?
Sure.
So assume 37 minutes of a person hooked up to a Lucas machine and assume 100 compressions per minute. That would result in 3,700 compressions from a Lucas machine, correct?
Correct.
Could 3,700 compressions from a Lucas machine explain hemorrhaging in the pancreas?
You could.
And that explanation could be why there's hemorrhaging in the pancreas as opposed to hypothermia causing hemorrhaging in the pancreas, correct?
Possible.
Did you consider that at all in your autopsy report, the effect of the Lucas machine? Is it written anywhere in your autopsy report?
I do consider changes due to cardiopulmonary resuscitation. The rib fractures that were observed were attributed to CPR. Usually we will see some amount of hemorrhage in the soft tissues, but in this context, with the gastric findings, the pancreatic findings, and the information that he was found in the snow with a body temperature of 80 degrees. My opinion was that those hemorrhages, along with the gastric hemorrhages and his body temperature, were consistent with hypothermia.
My question was, does your report state anywhere the words Lucas machine?
No,
And you agree that a Lucas machine can cause hemorrhaging to the pancreas,
it can cause hemorrhage in a lot of tissues,
but including the pancreas.
including the pancreas.
If you see hemorrhaging of the pancreas and you believe that hemorrhaging is a contributor to hypothermic deaths, wouldn't you also expect to see Wisniewski ulcers?
I did note gastric hemorrhages.
So the court reporter needs to have a spelling of that. Doctor, can you give us the spelling of that?
Would you like to give it?
If you'd like me to, I'm prepared to give
ahead.
it. Thank you. Wischnewski. Can you just tell the jurors what Wisniewski spots or Wisniewski ulcers are?
Wisniewski spots are small hemorrhages, small areas of bleeding in the mucosa of the stomach that are thought to be associated with hypothermia, among other things. They're believed to be either a reaction to stress due to the hypothermia or some form of what we call reperfusion injury.
Is it correct that if someone is believed to die, at least in part, from hypothermia, that in 90% of the cases of death from hypothermia, you would find Wisniewski's ulcers?
I do not know the exact number.
Is it that you're not recalling what the percentage is for the percent of cases for death of hypothermia that you would expect to find Wisniewski's ulcers?
I don't,
Do you recall?
Hold on. Move on. The objection sustained. So
Okay.
you're asking it, yes, go
Okay.
ahead.
There were no Wisniewski's ulcers present in Mr. O'Keefe, is that correct?
I believe there were.
Can you point anywhere in your autopsy report where the word Wisniewski appears?
I did not call them Wisniewski spots. I called them gastric hemorrhages.
Right, so you didn't use the term Wisniewski and you didn't use the term ulcer, correct? In your report at all?
No, I used gastric hemorrhages under the title of hypothermia.
Do you believe that all hemorrhages in the pancreas are Wisniewski ulcers?
You mean the stomach?
I want to start with the pancreas.
Wisniewski ulcers are, the term is used to describe the gastric hemorrhages.
Right, so I wanted to clarify that. So now I want to move to the stomach.
Okay.
Do you believe all hemorrhages in the stomach are Wisniewski ulcers?
Not all of them.
Therefore, there can be Wisniewski ulcers and not be hemorrhaging, correct? Just by logic?
And not be hemorrhaging?
Correct. You can have a Wisniewski ulcer but not have hemorrhaging.
You could, but ulceration would manifest in what we call hemorrhage, the actual appearance of it.
What I'd like to do is to, with your Honor's permission, publish some depictions of first the gastric mucosa and then start with that, Your Honor. Dr. Scordi-Bello, do you recognize 164 as well, you describe what 164 is.
This is a picture of the stomach of Mr. O'Keefe after it was removed and opened and the contents were removed. And what you're looking at, this pink red surface, is the mucosa. That's the lining of the stomach. And you had used the word rugae before. These are the folds. Stomach has a lot of folds. And what you can see here are small areas that are redder than everything else. That's hemorrhage, that's blood. And these are the gastric hemorrhages that I described.
Right, so those are what you just showed, there's darker areas, there's just a few of them. That is what you refer to as hemorrhages, correct?
Wisniewski's was correct.
Well, you didn't use Wisniewski's in your report, correct? You referred to
Correct.
them as hemorrhages.
Correct.
Dr. Scordi-Bello, could you please take what's identified as Exhibit M and see if you can identify what that depicts?
Yes, this is a picture of a stomach. Again, the mucosa with hemorrhage.
Just hold for these, sorry. Not your fault.
Your Honor, can we take a break?
Yes. I'll see counsel at sidebar, please.
Sidebar.
Dr. Scordi-Bello, you have in front of you, which has been marked for identification as MM, and you were discussing that. Do you recognize that document? So you could sort of start over and reorient. You recognize that?
I recognize what it is, yes.
And what is it?
It is a picture of a stomach, of the mucosa of a stomach with multiple hemorrhages.
And does that exhibit fairly and accurately depict a stomach with what you have referred to as multiple ulcers?
Yes,
Dr. Scordi-Bello, is that the depiction that you were just describing at your witness stand?
yes.
And could you please, with the laser pointer, state what you see in this depiction?
So this is a stomach. This is the mucosa, the folds of the stomach. They're not very folded in this particular picture, but you can see these distinct areas that are that have a darker coloration. That's blood. These are hemorrhages.
And to be clear, this is not the stomach of Mr. O'Keefe. This is a medical reference depiction to sort of generic or some other depiction other than Mr. O'Keefe's stomach.
Correct.
If we could, with your Honor's permission, Mr. Wolk, put side by side this chalk with what is in evidence as the actual gastric mucosa of Mr. O'Keefe.
The objection sustained.
Could we, with your Honor's permission, publish simply Mr. O'Keefe's
Yes.
gastric mucosa?
Yes.
Isn't it correct, Dr. Scordi-Bello, that there are much less dark spots in this depiction of the gastric mucosa than there were in the chalk that we just displayed? In other words, that green depiction of what I'll just refer to as a generic stomach. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So, isn't it correct that for hypothermia and the presence of Wisniewski's ulcers or spots, that you have to have a predominance of the stomach covered by the spots for them to be Wisniewski ulcers?
I think there's different levels and different grades.
In hypothermia, particularly death from hypothermia, wouldn't you expect to see a predominance of those ulcers, meaning they take up most of the stomach lining? Isn't that what you would expect to see?
Not always. I have seen that. I have also seen cases with much fewer spots, as you refer to them.
But isn't the majority of the cases that you have seen where someone has actually died from hypothermia that the ulcers predominate, take up greater than 50% of the stomach?
Yes.
And what percentage of the, and I'm trying to avoid putting it up again, so what percentage of the gastric mucosa of Mr. O'Keefe would you estimate is taken up by the ulcers that you have identified?
I would say somewhere between 10, 15%.
Just 10 and 15%. Thank you. Now, if we could look to the issue of continuing with hypothermia, let's go to frostbite. Did you note any evidence of frostbite?
No, I did not.
Do you know the weather conditions in Canton, Massachusetts, starting at midnight on January 29, 2022, going through 6 a.m. on January 29, 2022?
It was very cold. There was a blizzard coming.
They called it a nor'easter, right?
Correct.
And when you say very cold, in addition to very cold, do you recall whether there were gusting winds?
I believe so.
And do you understand that when there's a very cold temperature in Fahrenheit and you add gusting winds, that is called, when you apply the two together, that's called wind chill, right?
Correct.
And with wind chill, doesn't the phenomenon of wind chill mean that the wind combined with the temperature brings the actual temperature down, and in addition to bringing it down, temperature in a wind chill calculation, it also has a physical effect on the body, correct? Wind chill. Doesn't wind chill also cause greater effects than if there was no wind?
Correct.
So in medical terms, the wind synergizes with the temperature and exacerbates the effect on a human.
Correct.
And with a wind chill, isn't it correct that you would have a greater chance of frostbite than if there was no wind chill effect at all?
Yes.
So, you saw no signs of frostbite on Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
At the time of my examination and at the time of autopsy, no, I did not.
Did you see frostbite at any other time with regard to Mr. O'Keefe?
I only examined him at the time of autopsy.
So, at the only time you examined him, which is at the time of autopsy, you had zero signs of frostbite, correct?
Correct.
Dr. Scordi-Bello, now that you have gone through this part of your examination here today, would you like to amend in any way your opinions as to whether hypothermia was any cause of the death of Mr. O'Keefe?
No, I don't. I still believe that there were hypothermic signs.
Hypothermic signs, correct?
Yes.
I'd like to move to another topic area, please. You did not include in your autopsy in any fashion any discussion of whether Mr. O'Keefe's injuries were consistent with a motor vehicle accident, did you?
No, I did not.
In fact, there were no injuries consistent with a motor vehicle impact on Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
Sustained.
Did you evaluate it all in your autopsy, whether Mr. O'Keefe had any injuries consistent with a motor vehicle accident? Objection.
I'll allow that.
Yes, I did examine his lower extremities. That is protocol in any case of suspected impact with a motor vehicle. So I did examine his legs and I did not see any evidence of an impact site.
And could you elaborate to the jury what you mean by no evidence of an impact site?
I'm going to sustain that objection.
What do you mean in your answer, no evidence of impact injuries?
I'll allow that.
What I look for is some sort of bruise, either on the outside of the leg or bleeding on the inside after the skin is reflected in the soft tissues, or any fracture of the bones of the legs. I did not observe those things
That was going to be my question. You did not observe any of those things, correct?
Correct.
I'd like to turn to, please, the face of the decedent in your analysis that you discussed on direct examination of that area of the decedent. You talked about ecchymosis, you recall that?
Yes.
In medical literature, there's a synonym for ecchymosis. It's sometimes referred to as raccoon eyes. Is that correct? Ecchymosis doesn't cause a laceration to an eyelid, does it?
No.
Ecchymosis does not cause a laceration to a nose, does it?
There was an abrasion on the nose, but no, the answer is no.
Correct. So ecchymosis doesn't cause a laceration to the nose, correct?
Correct.
Did your report at all evaluate whether there was any significance of the laceration to the eyelid that you spoke about in your direct testimony?
What do you mean?
Other than just noting that there was a laceration to the eyelid, did your report at all evaluate the potential significance, if any, of that laceration to the eyelid?
I noted it and photographed it, and it was part of the totality of the blunt impact injuries that I noted on both the face and the head.
Do you believe that the laceration to the eyelid could be caused by a blunt impact injury?
A laceration, by definition, is a blunt impact injury.
Do you believe the eyelid laceration was caused by a blunt impact injury from falling backwards and hitting one's head?
Not from falling backwards and hitting one's head, but that area at some point came in contact with a blunt object or surface.
Okay, if I could follow up on that, please. So you agree that if a person falls and hits the back of their head, that they cannot sustain an eyelid injury, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And if somebody falls backward and hits their head, they can't sustain from that impacted back of the head a laceration to the nose, correct?
Correct.
So if we could, Mr. Wolk, and with your Honor's permission, publish which is already in evidence, which are depictions. Let's start out with, please, the laceration to the right eyelid. And Dr. Scordi-Bello, is this the laceration to the right eyelid that we've been talking about of Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes, it did. Yes, it is.
That injury to the right eyelid, that laceration, could not be caused by someone falling backwards and hitting their head, correct?
Correct.
Dr. Scordi-Bello, I have placed before you what is in evidence now is 165, and Your Honor, may I have Mr. Wolk publish 165? Thank you, Mr. Wolk. So, Dr. Scordi-Bello, that laceration to the right eyelid could not be caused by a fall backwards where someone hits the back of the head, correct?
Correct.
So that injury, you've called, what do you label that category? Traumatic, did you use that phraseology?
Blunt impact.
Blunt impact. So that's a blunt, in your opinion, that's a blunt impact injury, correct?
Correct.
So is it correct that that injury had to occur in some manner other than falling backwards and hitting one's head?
Yes.
And is that injury consistent or inconsistent with a punch?
I'll allow it.
Could be consistent.
Dr. Scordi-Bello, I have put before you what is in evidence is 166, and Your Honor may, Mr. Wolk, publish.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Scordi-Bello, does that exhibit fairly and accurately depict the laceration to the nose of Mr. O'Keefe?
Yeah, it's an abrasion. I described it as an abrasion, as a scrape.
So you would classify that as a scrape?
Yes.
That scrape could not be caused by someone falling backwards and hitting the back of their head, could it?
Not by a single event, no.
On your direct testimony, you talked about injuries to the right arm of Mr. O'Keefe. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And is it correct that you, in your autopsy report, did not determine the cause of those wounds to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm.
That's correct.
I'm going to do the same thing, if I may, Dr. Scordi-Bello. I'm going to leave these with you, but I'm also going to waive the court's permission to have them published.
Okay.
Use whatever one best allow you to answer the question. Your Honor, may I have Mr. Wolf publish those two? Thank you. With regard to what is on the screen, am I correct that you noted these injuries to, and these wounds to Mr. O'Keefe in your autopsy report?
Yes.
And am I correct that you noted that there was a pattern to those wounds?
Correct.
And although you noted there was a pattern to the wounds, you were not able to determine the cause of those pattern wounds. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are those injuries consistent with a dog bite?
Based on our answer to the last question, ask something else.
I'm sorry, couldn't hear you.
Ask another question, sustain.
Can you identify any cause of those injuries that would be consistent with what is depicted on the screen? Objection.
So can you answer that, doctor?
I cannot.
You can take that down, Mr. Wolf. Thank you. Did you evaluate at all in your autopsy a gray hoodie sweatshirt of Mr. O'Keefe?
No, I did not.
Were you aware that there was clothing associated with Mr. O'Keefe when he came as part of the autopsy?
He did not have any clothing that came to us. The clothing was removed at the hospital and was packaged and I believe submitted as evidence.
So the clothing of Mr. O'Keefe, a t-shirt or a hoodie, didn't make its way to you?
No,
You were unable to reach a determination as to the manner of death of Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
that is correct.
So you had doubts about the manner of death of Mr. O'Keefe, and you consider those doubts reasonable?
Sustain. Sustain.
You were not able to reach a determination as to the manner of death of Mr. O'Keefe, correct?
Correct.
And manner of death, as you've testified, includes the circumstances surrounding death in addition to the medical analysis that you performed.
I'm sustaining it, asked and answered.
Thank you for answering my questions, Dr. Scordi-Bello.
You're welcome.